Let me mark that song right quick. Think everybody heard that 207. I'll say it again. In Judges chapter 5, we read about what is called the Song of Deborah. And that was the praise and thanksgiving that Deborah recited, praising God for the victory that he gave them over their enemy. And on this occasion, it was a king named Jabin and his commander of his army named Sisera. And the Canaanites were his people that they defeated. In verse 23, amongst all that praise, we read an interesting statement. In the King James, it says, "Curse Meroz, said the angel of the Lord. Curse its inhabitants bitterly." Kind of odd in the midst of the praise that they're offering, she's offering to God. But we don't know exactly where Meroz was located. It was in northern Israel. And notice that the people were cursed by God's representative, or the angel of the Lord. And in some of these scriptures where it says the angel of the Lord, it is often thought that that might represent Jesus before he took on flesh. But nevertheless, it was a representative of God that said this. So this message was from God. Curse Meroz, it says. And notice that the people weren't cursed for idolatry, for their idolatry. They weren't cursed for their immorality. They were cursed for doing nothing, if you read on in that verse. And they were cursed for their neglect, for not coming to help their fellow Israelites against their enemies. And that's the reason they were cursed. They could have helped their brethren, and they should have helped their brethren, but they did not. Neglect is what I want to talk about for just a few minutes. That's what they did. They neglected to help when they were called to help, evidently, to help out in the battle. Neglect is an easy sin to commit because you don't have to do anything. You don't have to do anything. It's so easy. And because of that, it's a danger to us today as Christians. It's a danger to us. And in the scriptures, there are many warnings against that. This is one of them here in Judges 5. I want to consider with you briefly just three things that we must be sure we don't neglect as Christians. The first thing I would suggest is we need to be sure we don't neglect our stewardship as Christians. And this is clearly set forth in the parable that Jesus gave of what we used to call the parable of the talents. And we know the story that it represents a man who had servants, and he gave different amounts of money, 5 talents, 2 talents, and 1 talent to 3 different servants. And he went away, and he came back, and he settled accounts with them. Now, they understood what the master wanted from them. They understood that they were to use those amounts of money that were given to them, and that they were to increase those. And that's clear from the story as we follow through it. And the servant that received 5 talents gained 5. The servant that received 2 talents gained 2 talents. And both of them were commended for their faithfulness. And in verse 21 of Matthew 25, we read one of those commendations, and this is what we want to hear when our life is over here. It says, his Lord said to him, "Well done, good and faithful servant. You were faithful over a few things. I will make you rule over many things. Enter into the joy of your Lord." So they were faithful, and they were blessed because of their faithfulness, because they used what the Lord had placed in their hands to increase his kingdom and to increase his work. But notice that last servant. There's the neglect. The servant that had the 1 talent didn't do anything with it, but he hid it, he buried it. And he brought it back to his master without any increase. And he was called a wicked and lazy servant because he did nothing with his master's money. And he was cast into outer darkness. And the lesson for us there is we're stewards of all the Lord has placed in our hands. And we have so much. Our stewardship is very large as Christians. We have material things, we have spiritual things. We are stewards of our time. We're stewards of our money, our abilities. And it's interesting that this parable is so well known that when we talk about talents today, that's what people think about, it's our abilities. But originally the talents, of course, were amounts of money. But they represent abilities and other things that we have as stewards. But other things also, we have influence. And the most important stewardship we have is the gospel. We have the gospel that we should be using in our own lives and helping others to use it in their lives. But the Lord expects us to use the things that He's placed in our hands for His benefit, And He's going to evaluate our stewardship in the future. He's going to evaluate our stewardship. Notice that we need to be sure we don't neglect other people. We don't neglect those in need around us. We have a responsibility to do good to all people. Galatians 6:10 says, therefore, as we have opportunity, let us do good to all, especially to those who are of the household of faith. We all know the story of the Good Samaritan, how the man was wounded on the side of the road and the priest and the Levi just went on by. They didn't help him, but the Good Samaritan helped him. He provided for, he poured oil into his wounds, and he took him to a place where he could recover, and he made arrangements for him. And Jesus said to those who had questioned him about who's their neighbor, he said, go and do likewise. And he expects us to do that too. Now, in Matthew chapter 25, verse 31, we read part of that tonight about Jesus returning with his angels and sitting on his throne and judging all nations. Well, he said he's going to separate the people like the sheep and the goats. And the sheep are going to be blessed. And in the story in Matthew 25, or the account in Matthew 25, that blessing is because they helped those around them. They ministered to those who were in need around them. And the goats are going to be condemned because they neglected to minister to those around them. Jesus said, inasmuch as you did it to me, inasmuch as you did it to the least of one of these, my brethren, you did it to me. So when we help those in need, we are helping Jesus. We're serving him. So we need to be sure that we don't neglect our responsibilities to those who are our neighbors around us and those that we can help that are in need. And finally, we need to be sure we don't neglect our own soul. Our own soul. As we noticed, Matthew 16:26 indicates that our soul is the most valuable possession we have. If we gain the whole world and lose it, we've lost all. We've lost all. And there'll be no recovery. There'll be no buying it back. And it's going to exist after our body has been disposed of, whatever that means now today, whether it's buried or whether it's cremated, whatever. But it's going to exist beyond the body, and it ought to receive our greatest attention. We ought to give more attention to our inner man or person than we do to our outer person. But people generally don't do that. They pay more attention to the way they look than the way they are inside. Our soul needs spiritual nourishment. It needs exercise in godliness, 1 Timothy 4, verses 7 and 8. And it needs to grow and be like Jesus. And in doing so, we prepare our soul for eternity. But you know, some people are starving their soul today. Some are involving themselves in sin, and that destroys the soul. And others are filling their lives with seeking pleasure and possessions and prominence. And those things will not last. And those things are trivial when you think in terms of eternity. They're majoring in minors. And so we need to be sure we don't do that. And if a person does that, he's going to be a spiritual pauper when he or she departs this life. We need to be sure we're laying up treasure in heaven as we live here on earth. So as we sum up the things we've been talking about, first of all, we need to notice that neglect of our responsibilities is a sin. In James 4:17, it says, therefore, to him who knows to do good and does not do it, to him it is sin. That's James 4:17. And we need to be sure we're fulfilling our responsibilities to God and to other people, and that we're taking care of our own soul and nourishing our own soul. But neglect is a danger to us. We need to remember that. But those who are busy serving the Lord won't be guilty of neglect. If we're busy serving Him, we won't be guilty of neglecting our duty to Him or to other people. If we can help you in spiritually, in drawing closer to the Lord and praying for you, if you have that need, we'd be glad to do that. And we bid you come if you have that need while we stand and while we sing.